Good morning, and thank you for putting together this great conference. We've had many good, important conversations, and I already see how this topic is evolving, and our thinking on many of these questions are evolving as well. And I think this paper with Alexander Kuo is a transition paper, and that I think reflects some of the general, both academic and public debate and changing opinion around technology. So we are in a context of growing technocritical debates. For those of us who have been in this field of technology and public policy, public opinion, and so on, there has been for a long time a very positive view in general about technology, and for sure, so as I'm going to debate this idea that it's very related to economic progress, that it's very important for the nations to keep ahead, like that's very deeply ingrained. But also in last years, there have been more and more voices with some technocritical concerns. And this may include digital monopolies, the impact of different technologies on democracy because of different pathways, on sovereignty, on privacy, on mental health, on human rights, etc. And also, it's not only an academic debate, but we see also in public opinion some of these more technocritical voices becoming more important. And we have some debates in many countries about issues like, is it necessary to regulate the platform economy, Uber, Airbnb, and so on, and tax big online retail like Amazon because it's destroying small city centers? Do we need to create robots taxes that are in some way similar to taxes on labor? Because we do have taxes on workers, but less so on algorithms, and in some cases they do similar work. So what's the correct taxation for algorithms? We see in many countries, like for instance, Germany is a well-researched case, and currently there's the digitalization-related issues get as much attention in party manifestos as welfare or European integration. So it is not longer the case that this is a very marginal issue in political debate. The EU AI Act categorizes AI systems used in employment as high risk precisely because of the potential for substitution and so on. And so we'll need to see what this means in practice. We've had strikes by writers, actors, train drivers, more related to the introduction of AI. And even in the US, there's important regulatory activity at the state level, in executive orders, and congressional hearings. So, and in this broader debate on more concerns around the implications for technology, we, in this paper, we focus on what we think is a potentially influential framework in political economy that for a long time has argued that the third industrial revolution produced job polarization and inequality in advanced industrial democracies since the 1970s, and that this has, even if, of course, it has created economic growth and so on, it also caused declining real wages for men without college degrees and economic concentration in a few superstar firms that then have disproportionate political power. And so, what's recent is the idea that technological change can have net negative impacts on employment. So we have some comeback of Ludit ideas, but probably with some better grounding. And we are not saying that's what's happening, but this is an empirical question, no? So we need to study impacts on employment, on wages, on aggregate welfare of the rollout and introduction of new digital technologies in economic settings. And the policy advice following from this framework is that when technological development follows a path that is not socially optimal or even could reduce aggregate welfare in some instances, then there is justification for government intervention in the adoption of technology in economic settings. And this type of thinking aligns with current shifts in favoring perhaps more interventionist approaches that have been carried out both in the US and EU in the last years regarding different types of areas, including climate change and others. So this is the broad motivation and framework, but we are focusing on specific research questions here we think are novel. So the first is, do citizens believe that governments should intervene in how new technologies are adopted in economic settings? So we are not talking about how AI will influence discrimination or information for voters. So it's focused on economic settings. What are the correlates of support for this type of policies, and which basic arguments often made for or against technological steering can affect citizens' opinion on this topic? And to preview what we find, so to the first question, yes, we find broad support for some steering of technology adoption in economic settings. The correlates that we find are not very clearly linked to actual risks. So they are driven by other individual factors. And yes, public opinion is quite malleable to arguments linking technology to economic progress or to protection of different groups. And so our contributions with this particular paper is for the literature about the political economy of digitalization and AI, to which many people in the room have contributed. So a lot of this literature has focused on how technological change, mostly from the third industrial revolution, affects attitudes such as demand for redistribution, active labor market policies, basic income, and so on. While we focus on a new type of policies, we conceptualize it, and we gather data and try to understand attitudes about that. And in addition to considering, so most of this literature only focuses on people as workers, and we also consider them as consumers, and I'm aware there's a paper by many of the organizers that also considers them as consumers, so we add to this idea. And for this literature, the big literature on more critical of the current path of technological development, we provide some micro-foundations on the democratic basis of support for these policies. Do people want them? So for that, I think it's important to define the concept of, so we use Reto Burgiser's concept of technological steering, which are a set of policies designed to influence how new technologies are adopted in workplaces, production processes, or consumption settings, with the goal of protecting some groups or some general interest. And typically, those policies use tools like regulation and taxation, so classical tools. And examples are robots and algorithms taxes that are debated in many countries, regulating the platform economy. Again, we have many examples of regulation, increasing taxes to online retailers, limiting firms' use of technology for workers' surveillance, as like now very clearly in the case of EU and also in other countries, and provisions to keep humans in the loop to prevent complete human replacement, and more theoretically, worker co-determination policies, so giving workers more say in decisions of technology adoption. Okay, so I'll switch or move on to the hypothesis. We have three types of hypotheses. One is just on individual correlates, and the idea is based on depending on individual self-interest. they will develop attitudes on this topic. So one identity is individuals as workers. So if you think you may, for objective or subjective reasons, tend to benefit from technological development in general, so you're less likely to support these policies. And from individuals as consumers. So if you come to the conference by Uber, maybe you have different types of preferences on the regulation of these services, no, than people who don't. So the hypotheses are pretty straightforward. I'll speed up. So we have two types of arguments about the frames, and that's more like an ideational type of level. And we try to detect the two main frames around technology that are there in public discourse. So one is this, so some groups need protection. Shopkeepers, they are necessary to maintain social capital, and we need to protect these people in small villages in France. No? And these are for groups that are perceived as deserving, and people may be motivated to protect those. And the other big narrative is, technology equals economic progress, and economic progress, maybe it's necessary to keep ahead with China. So you cannot stop that. Even if some people are harmed and so on average, it's good for everybody. Okay, so we collect data in 5 EU countries. We ran the survey last year, and we have big samples that allow us to test for heterogeneity and conducted the typical online survey. For measurement, we have this broader concept. Technological steering is the theoretical concept, but it's a concept by postulation. So people don't know about that. No? So we developed questions on 6 specific policies that are plausible, that could be debated in these countries. And so let me maybe go directly to the policies. So they are things like the government should increase taxes and regulations on firms that adopt software, robots, and algorithms that do the work that their workers do. That's an attempt to say robots taxes in lay people language. And we have 6 policies like that. For instance, on platform companies or Amazon. And then we have an experimental design that's a very straightforward 2x2 on the 2 considerations I was saying. One is this type of policy would protect a group of people, no? That like shopkeepers. And the second one is information about, this kind of regulation or taxation policy could reduce economic development or competitiveness. And so it's just a 2x2 experiment. So we have a lot of covariates in the survey. And to go to the results, so we find considerable support. This is data from the control group on all 6 policies, and higher values indicate more support. So the app, when you don't give more information to people, they either don't know or support the policies for all 6 areas in all 6 countries. We look at extensively at individual level correlates. We don't find large correlations between social demographics and or occupational risks and these policies. And for the experimental results, what we find is that compared to people in the control group, which would be represented by the 0, if you give people the information that this policy would protect specific groups, you increase support for the policy. If you mention, a bit, these are the blue results, and if you mention that this policy would be harmful to economic growth, to competitiveness, it reduces support for a policy a lot. So the current ideology, progress ideology on technology, it's very effective at changing people's attitudes. So takeaways, what I just said. So the results are very similar in the 5 countries. So we have in the appendices much information on what's Poland specific and so on. But on average, we have pretty much the same story. And we also sensible objective indicators don't seem to moderate the treatment effects. And in summary, we find considerable support for greater steering of technology adoption in economic settings by the government. So people would like the government to tax, regulate, or at least consider that a solution. These attitudes are still not very clearly structured. So it's mostly people who are more techno-optimists, but dislike them. Techno-pessimists like them, but it's not very tied to specific cleavages. And the sociotropic narrative that links technology to economic progress is very powerful and very convincing.
Okay, we'll take questions, and we've got Mike and Beatrice are going to pass around the mics. Any hands up?
No, I think it's churros and amazing breakfast. I know it's slowing down some neurons. So thank you for both breakfast and the awesome presentation. I thought this was really cool, and it's just broad and kind of like a big lift to tell us so much about so many people's attitudes and look at so many different dimensions. So my question would be, is there a similar domain that we could use to benchmark the degree to which attitudes are structured or unstructured? Like I think I have a general idea about if you handed me 5 covariates, what they would do to predict, say, trade attitudes, and it would be kind of like medium coherent. And then if you asked me to predict like tax or abortion attitudes, it would be quite coherent. So is there a way to benchmark what you're finding on the degree of coherence or structure relative to something else?
Should we collect a couple more? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, hello. This was really interesting. I agree. I'm very curious about the comparison of regulations or intra-regulations, because a lot of times, I think especially with these emerging technologies, the regulation stuff, people select sort of the lowest common denominator and then work from there. So I'm sort of curious how maybe different like bundles of regulatory treatment might affect the results and sort of the sensitivities in there as well. So like, can you like only apply to, or would, find a way, like a domain where that only applies in like one way, so to like get different dimensionality within the regulatory framework.
We've got Bao and Victor as well.
Hi, this is such fantastic work. I have maybe a suggestion for future additional studies. I just recently read a paper on sort of general anti-technology attitudes and like orientation as perhaps beyond, they didn't find it was like a left-right dimension, and it was more sort of related to various psychological orientations. And it seems to be correlated with sort of distrust of Western medicine, perhaps like other scientific or technological advances. So I'm just wondering if this is like a deeper psychological orientation beyond sort of the typical left-right dimension that we see.
Yeah, very interesting work. I would like you to voice your thoughts on adjudicating between 3 potential mechanisms for the sociotropic results. The way I see it, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, 3 possibilities are: 1, it is truly sociotropic in that it's other regarding or about the whole of society, so that's driving it. 2, folks actually understand the facts, and the facts are, due to Nobel Prize winning contributions to economics, that it is true that technology drives material progress. Like, you could argue with that, I suppose, but it would be a very difficult argument to make. So are people actually aware that this is true? within the scientific bounds of uncertainty, obviously, right? Not as a deterministic law. But third, could it be that people in their own lives have seen, on average, that technology has improved human welfare? So more of the narrative correlates with my own experience. I think that would be extremely fascinating because to me, at this point, it seems like the three are conflated there, and it would be fun to tease out which of the three, if I'm correct, is driving that result. And your thoughts on that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, go ahead, Aina. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So I think, yes, definitely we should find a way to measure attitude coherence, and maybe it would just be looking at the R squared, or I don't know what so having traits instead of this as a dependent variable, and we have that, and regressing, running the same models and seeing if explanatory factors explain variation more for some dimensions than others. Definitely that's feasible, and that's a good suggestion. On the regulatory focus, I get that the proposal is to not look at 6 different dimensions, but maybe at 1. That was a bit by design, but yes, definitely that's something for future work to look at more specifically at some policies rather than at all of them. Baobab's comment, I think, yes, I'm also very curious about this literature and anti-tech, and what it seems to be emerging is that people who feel unsafe and are more distrustful, there's this need for chaos, there are different types of psychological orientations that are very linked to populist attitudes, and that's what's driving anti-technology sentiment, but that should warn us about something, no? So that as this type of disengaged, distrustful people increase in the population, we should also see more anti-vaccine, distrust of different type of technologies, and that has consequences for adoption. So totally, I think this is an interesting avenue for research. On the mechanisms, we actually were very careful in the design of having for every hypothesis what would be self-interest indicators, and so we didn't go in detail, but we, so for instance, for consumption of platform, the platform economy, so we measure if the person is a consumer and then moderate, interact the treatment condition with the self-interest, one to see if what we are observing is driven by other regarding preferences or self-interest. On average, we don't find the hypothesized moderators for self-interest are not particularly we don't find these interactions. And then yes, you are giving for granted that technology is a driver of technological growth and of economic growth, and of course we have Carla's in the room with the book, and that's of course. So that's in many cases it is like that, but it doesn't mean first that all technologies, every single technology ever invented, is good for economic growth. That doesn't make much sense. But also there's a zeitgeist, and I think now we are in a moment. There's some pushback because many people believe that social media in particular didn't live up to the big claims, that it would make the world better. And now with AI, people are a bit more cautious. And if you look, and I know social media, so the debate is not about the economic effect, but many people do believe that in surveys that the world is worse off with Instagram and TikTok. No? That's, and maybe they are partly transferring a bit of these considerations to new technologies like AI, and that's I think technology by technology, that's a social science question, no? So it will have effects on many domains of life, and it takes a few years to see what those effects are on the aggregate.
Just a quick follow-up. My question was more about not the normative, if it's not people's normative predilections, nor whether it's good on average or not. more about whether what you might be finding is a body of facts about technology's effects versus the speculative nature of the other distributional consequences, which have not yet panned out. So that's what I meant about maybe that could be driving that. Oh, we know on average this turned out the way it did,
Okay.
and there's research that supports that. Whereas your other questions are, we don't know what's going to happen distributionally. So when I was saying maybe it's not the sociotropic stuff as much as fact pattern established versus more speculative on the other dimension, which was not sociotropic.
If you have a really quick response, sure.
Really quick, yes. If I could redo the experiment, we've probably, yes, all of these are speculative. We've probably would do a stronger argument, so more that, so instead of the social, the distributional impacts, a stronger argument on maybe it's, this impact is negative on the average, so on average to make the two more symmetric. I think if anything, our treatments, one was very strong and one was weaker. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aina. Okay. Next we have Yotam.